First of all, I have to say to all the Greeks here that I'm not an expert on Greece, but obviously we're very excited and enthused by what has happened in Greece, perhaps more so than you guys are, coming from a rival party to Syriza. I think I preface everything by saying it's our duty and responsibility to offer as much support as we can to support the efforts of the government against the Troika and the European Commission, the ECB, and so on in the struggles which are to come. But I think it's also, this is titled Lessons for the Left, and it's maybe a bit premature to draw conclusive lessons, because obviously this government was elected less than 2 weeks ago. The Parliament was only sworn in on Thursday, so everything is beginning. But for what it's worth, I'd like to put the discussion, part of the discussion, in the context of the kind of questions which I think are important whenever the left gets a sniff of power or office. And perhaps because I've been drawn together quite a lot of material over the last couple of weeks, and I'm not sure in 15 minutes I'm going to get to the end of what I've prepared here. So perhaps I'll start with what I think the key questions are, and then go on to some analysis of what I think the Greek government is trying to do, and then perhaps we can have a discussion about the adequacy of its efforts, how successful it's likely to be, and what socialists and Marxists, both in Greece and abroad, ought to be doing now. So the issues that I think are thrown up are the concept of workers' government, which obviously we're hearing a lot now about this being the first workers' government elected in Europe since the Popular Front governments of France and Spain in 1936. I think it's quite a slippery concept. It's linked to that of the United Front between revolutionaries and reformists. I'm not sure it's appropriately used as far as this government is concerned. I think it goes along with other terms like transitional demands. This is really broadening the discussion out, which cover a multitude of sins and are often not used to achieve precision in our analysis of what's going on and what we ought to do, but are used to excuse whatever the left chooses to do. A bit like Wilson saying that socialism is whatever a Labour government does. So workers' government, transitional demands are whatever revolutionaries choose to demand. Second is where is the strategy for socialist transformation in what is happening in Greece? Obviously, the government has come to power on a platform of anti-austerity. That matches what left unity has come together to achieve here, what it explicitly says it's seeking to achieve. It's also the platform on which Tusk, for instance, is running in the general election. But what is the link between fighting austerity and achieving a transformation of society? Is a government based purely on anti-austerity a viable proposition? Syriza, the memorandum, its battle with the Troika and so on, obviously raises the whole issue of the euro, the EU in or out, whether you should completely renounce the debt or not. That seems to be between the mainstream and the left within Syriza, and perhaps between Syriza and Tarsia. That seems to be the line of differentiation. So I'd be interested in exploring that, because I don't think it's a simple question. I don't think, and that's socialism in one country, we've now to austerity in one country, is a particularly beguiling prospect. So how do you supersede the struggle within the nation state? And then the question I think is crucial for socialist transformation is the question of state power. How does the working class achieve state power? So with 10 minutes to go, I'll move on from my introduction and actually look in about 5 minutes, I'm just going to cover 3 pages of this, at what it looks to me like Syriza is trying to achieve. It was an enormously, it is a big step for a government of the left with no links to PASOK. The main traditions within Syriza don't have a link to PASOK at all. They were linked to the Communist Party, the KKE, to the KKE of the interior, the Euro-Communists, who split in 1968 and then went through various transformations, and to Maoists, to Trotskyists and so on. And more recently, some individuals have come over from PASOK in the last few years, and so perhaps those from Greece could maybe explore what kind of impact that has, whether they're from the left of PASOK and therefore making a good contribution to what Syriza is doing, or whether they're contributing to moderating its demands or not. But there's been a very clear elan and chutzpah in what the government has been doing, from the way that they've addressed the fact that they've taken several oaths when swearing to be Prime Minister or MPs and so on. Tsipras was the, you'd have to excuse my pronunciation of Greek names and words as well, was the first Prime Minister in Greek history, I believe, to not take a religious oath. So I think things like that are symbolic, and they are significant about there being, this being a different type of government to the type of governments we've had in the past, and they're coming from completely different traditions to those we've had in the past, recognising that the communist and left tradition has suffered suppression, the civil war after the First World War, the Colonel's coup and so on. So the Communist Party was banned until 1974, I think. So for a party with lots of members of the government coming from that tradition to be in power now is hugely significant. Well, it's significant, I think. And its immediate actions, there was the Thessaloniki programme, which was agreed at a Congress of Syriza in September of last year. And from the announcements that the government has made and the steps they actually have made, it looks like they are actually implementing the main elements of that, from setting the minimum wage to 751 euros, announcing that all public sector and council workers who've been unconstitutionally dismissed will be rehired, and symbolically the women cleaners of the finance ministry who've been mounting a picket have been told that they're going to be rehired, reinstatement of collective bargaining agreements, scrapping the memorandum agreement to reduce pensions and raise the age limit for when you'll get the pension, privatisations which were in the offing of the Port of Piraeus, the state energy company, the tendering of 14 regional airports. All those have been cancelled. They're going to make moves to give full access to the health system and so on. Reforms of the education system have been reversed. Proposals to give free electricity to 300,000 poorest households and so on. These have all been announcements that the abolition of the property tax. These are all proposals which are in the Thessaloniki programme, and they've seem to be taking immediate steps to prepare legislation to pass these, or pass them if they have the ability as a government to do with that. So it does seem a dynamic government that is seeking to keep faith with the programme it went to the election on. The big question, though, is whether what the implications of this will be around debt and so on. And the government, as we know, Syriza is committed to staying in the euro and the EU. The Thessaloniki programme actually represented a step back from 2012, the two elections then, when it was committed to renouncing the whole debt. In the Thessaloniki agreements, as I understand it, they talked about getting rid of approximately half of the debt. I think the new finance minister, I've got his name here, Varoufakis, who we've seen a lot of on the TV recently. Strangely, in the reports beforehand, he was hardly mentioned at all, occasionally mentioned as an advisor to Syriza, and others seemed to be lined up for that job. But actually he was apparently elected in Athens B district, which was quite difficult, so perhaps his election as an MP wasn't anticipated. But he's, as we know, has been going around Europe speaking to national governments and so on. The proposal that they've come up with for growth links to replace the bonds which are owed to the European Commission and the ECB with growth-linked security, so they're only paid back if Greece grows, and to replace another proportion of them with perpetual bonds which effectively never pay back, although you will pay interest on them. I think does seem to me to be quite, in terms of their programme, to be quite a smart move in terms of coming up with a strategy which at least has a chance of succeeding. The fiscal context for that is that because of the horrendous tax on social services and wages and conditions and so on that the previous government under the memorandum has been enacting, Greece actually has what's called a primary fiscal surplus of 4%. So once you, if you take the payments of the interest on debt out of account, the government actually has is bringing in more revenue to the tune of 4% than it actually spends. So if it stops paying the interest on debt, it actually has fiscal space to spend money on things, and that space, I understand, is about €6 billion of spending. That means that if it can persuade the EU, the European Commission and the ECB to give it the space, it actually can has the fiscal capacity to enact the programme that it's come up with. I'm going to completely run out of time here. So the question is, what chance does it have of success? And obviously, there, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, the Germans publicly are big opponents, and I think they will be big opponents of what they want to do. They're looking, and also the Spanish government, the Portuguese government, the Dutch and Finns are saying they're not going to make any concessions to this at all. The Spanish government, obviously, Portuguese, have been going through the same kind of bailout agreement as Greece, although the impact has not been as severe. But you've got Podemos is rising in the opinion polls in Spain, these governments are not going to want to make, it's a political decision as much as anything else, they're not going to want to make a concession to Syriza, which actually strengthens the anti-austerity forces in their own country. So it's all political. On the other hand, there have been relatively friendly noises from France, Italy, even the British government, and potentially the US government, which are, strangely enough, from our perspective, are actually against the very deflationary policy which the German government has been enforcing on the Eurozone area. If you look at the figures, the British and American governments, surprising as it is, have a much more, fiscally have a much more reflationary stance than the Eurozone area does. So that's interesting as far as the question of anti-austerity is concerned, because I'm going to have to finish now, because I think that the Greek government does have space to negotiate with the Eurozone because of this primary fiscal surplus that it has. That also means that potentially it could go down to the wire, and if it were to default on its debt and say we're not going to pay anything at all, it has that same fiscal space outside of the Eurozone. There's enormous potential economic consequences with runs on the banks and all that kind of thing, and what steps it would need to take if it were to be, if Brexit were to happen, and whether they're prepared to do that or not is the question. Paul Mason in his blog says that he thinks they are, that their strategy is the Samson strategy, that they will go down to the wire, and they're not going, the Greek government is not going to capitulate or back down, and if the Eurozone won't itself make any concessions, they'll bring the whole thing down, and they'll be prepared to operate outside, and they actually have, at least initially, the fiscal space to make that happen. I think it's going to be enormously difficult. You've got this is what the left of Syriza, the left platform of Syriza wants to happen, and Kostas Lapavitsas, who we're familiar with here, was elected as an MP, and this is the strategy which he's been calling for all along, a sort of siege economy, and there's and I'll need to finish there, but the questions, it's a good job that I did raise the key theoretical questions which I think are going to come out of this whole experience at the beginning, because I think those are the key issues. Yeah, I think the question of the independent Greeks is an interesting one to tackle. I can deal with initially. I think Kostas is absolutely right. They're not fascist, but they are right nationalist conservatives. They're split with New Democracy precisely on the issue of the memorandum. And it's not the case that this was cooked up at the last minute after the election result, and Syriza just missed getting an absolute majority by 2 seats, or 1 seat if it's switched. This has obviously been, they've been having discussions, and there's been contacts for the last year or so, and in a sense it's an indication that Syriza is serious about carrying out the programme which is indicated. The programme isn't a socialist programme, it's an anti-austerity, tackling the debt programme, getting out from under the memorandum and the troika. Since the KKE has made it clear for several years, that from 2012, when Tsipras, as I understand it, before the May elections, was calling for a anti-austerity front of the left, and the KKE completely blackballed him on that when he was given the chance to form a government by the president and spoke to different parties. The KKE refused to speak to him. Since then, it's obvious he's switched strategy. And if you look at the to having, and this is where the nationalism and talking about the Greek nation in his opening speech comes into it, I think. that they are articulating the anti-austerity struggle, not so much in class terms, but in terms of the Greek nation, and what Nick said earlier was absolutely right on that front as well. In fact, the Thessaloniki programme talks with Syriza for a national reconstruction plan for Greek society. Nothing about the working class there either. So it's not that they're going to renege on the programme which they put before the Greeks in the election. I think they are looking to implement it. In terms of immigrants and so on, they have said that the minister responsible has said that they will give the children of immigrants who were born here Greek nationality. It's also said that they'll close the refugee and migrant camps, and now the Independent Greeks have said that they won't support that. It'll be interesting to see how the KKE votes. They're just short by 2 votes of having a majority, so you'd think that they could push through, even if the KKE abstains and doesn't support them, they will still have a majority in the Greek parliament for whatever measures they want. So some people have suggested that this is a temporary alliance that they'll, with the Independent Greeks, that they'll look to get as much of their programme through as they can and might go for an early election. It doesn't seem to me that that necessarily is their strategy. I don't think that they will, someone said that they'll be in power for a few years and there'll be an election and they lose. As I said before, I think this is going to be determined one way or the other over the next few months. That in terms of averting a run on the Greek banks, and in terms of coming to a deal which allows them to deal with the bonds, £8 billion of bond payments which they're going to have to repay, that's going to be determined over the next few months. The left platform, I'm not sure, see, this axis of division on the question of being in the Eurozone or not. I don't think the prospect for Greece outside of the Eurozone as an independent anti-austerity country, perhaps Syriza and the mainstream in Syriza apparently have a liking for Chavez and the Bolivarian revolution. That hasn't achieved socialism either, and in a very large sense is a nationalist experiment. Expressed in nationalist terms, the Bolivarian is a nationalist thing in Venezuela. I've been there. Every square has a statue to Bolivar. So claiming that you're Bolivarian is actually attempt to appeal the whole to Venezuelan nationalism. And I think if they're forced out of the Eurozone, the left platform policy is to leave the Eurozone. That they will that will have to be a nationalist experiment as well, and perhaps there might be some space for that in terms of coming to deal with the Russians, because the Independent Greeks have contacts with the Russians, it's said, and Syriza, because of communist antecedents, also have Russian connections. The Russian ambassador was the first person that Tsipras saw as prime minister of Greece. So they might be preparing for leaving the Eurozone and coming to deal with the Russians. For socialists, that's not a very that doesn't look like a very good prospect to me either. So I actually think that the only way that Greece or any other country within the EU can move towards socialist transformation is on a European scale. So I think it's superfluous to talk about leaving the EU. The EU is either transformed into a socialist European federation or confederation as part of that transformation, or you are going to fail. Ultimately, Greece either as an anti-austerity entity within the Eurozone or outside of it, cannot succeed. It's socialist transformation which is the key question, and the key aspect of that is how do you transform the institutions of the state? How do you create workers' power in Greece and across Europe? I don't think the left globally has even begun to tackle that issue. We've got lots of answers from the past, but the kind of when we stand in elections now, like we're doing in Britain in May, we're not putting forward a programme that deals with those issues. Even when we know we're not going to get elected, so we could put forward whatever we wanted as a programme in May, and we could begin to raise issues now. We aren't doing that. That's a discussion for this afternoon, perhaps.
Thanks very much, Nick.